Go ahead and get started with some brief housekeeping. If you've been to an echo session before, you have heard all of this, but I will share just in case we have some new people today. These sessions are recorded. We keep them on our Canvas page so they can be accessed later on. If you would not like to be recorded, you are welcome to leave the meeting at any time. If you have any questions, feel free to message myself or any of our other hub team members. Our hub team members have the same background as me. It's this echo hub team background. There are a few Zoom housekeeping items. We have been on Zoom for a couple of years now, thanks to COVID. So if you do need help with renaming your profile or raising your hand, which isn't necessary, if you have a comment, you're welcome to unmute or add something in the chat. You can reach out to me and I can help with that. Because this is an echo session where we talk a lot about case conceptualization and experiences that we've had, just be sure that you are protecting individual privacy. So if you're sharing information about another person, please avoid providing any identifiable information, which would include their first, middle, or last name, anything like their family members, friends, contact information. We want to make sure that we're de-identifying examples and situations so that we are protecting privacy. If you are unsure about whether or not you can or should share something, that's another thing. You can feel free to message me and I will think through that with you. This is an echo, which is different than a standard webinar. It's more like a community of practice. It's heavily participation based. What we'll do first is have a didactic presentation from our wonderful presenter, Andrea, today. And then after that, we'll have some time for questions and potentially a case consideration. So as I mentioned, this is similar to a community of practice setting. We'll have our didactic presentation. Today, depending on how much time we have afterwards, you'll have a chance to ask questions. If you have case-specific questions, we can answer those as well. If in the future you'd like to have a case study addressed by the MHIDD ECHO team or one of our sessions, we would love that. It's great to have input. If you would like to submit a case or if you have any questions, you can send an email to mhidd@aggies.usu.edu. I will put that email in the chat. You can also send an email to that MHIDD address if you'd like to be added to the Canvas page. If you get on the Canvas page, all of our previous recordings are on there, as well as resources from past echo sessions. If you want credit for attendance, we do offer CEUs through the Utah Social Work Association, and we offer a certificate of attendance. If you'd like either of those, you'll need to fill out the survey link, which we will drop in the chat. If you'd like to join our Canvas page, you can reach out to that email that I dropped in the chat earlier. I'll also add it later in case anyone joins late. We do have social media pages if you're interested in learning more about this echo series or any of our other echo series that are ongoing. This QR code will take you to our social media. We have Facebook and Instagram. We have one more session in our current series. We won't have a session in June. I will be out of the office along with a few other office members. So our final session will be July 22nd. And that will be on documentation, referral, and reporting of mental health concerns and incidents for disability service providers. So you should be seeing a flyer come through your inbox sometime within the next week or two. You can register for that if you are interested. Today, we are super lucky to have Dr. Andrea Witwer with us. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at the Ohio State University Nisonger Center. Her research and clinical interests include autism and intellectual developmental disabilities. Andrea is super knowledgeable. I'm so glad that you are willing to present to us today. I will turn it over to you. You feel free to add to your introduction and get rolling with your slides.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm so excited to be here. I love Echo. We do our own echoes, and I love talking mental health and IDD. So it's like the marrying of two of my favorite worlds all together. All right, I'm going to check. Everyone can hopefully see the right slides. and they are moving. That's the other thing I've learned that I need to check as we go through. Okay, cool. Well, so my plan today is to present our psychotherapy guidelines that we pulled together as a part of our Rehabilitation Research and Training Center grant. And these are really guidelines, practice guidelines that we pulled together as a part of a 5-year process to help individuals who are going to be doing psychotherapy for adults with intellectual disability, but also I think for broader folks that interact with adults with IDD and mental health. There's a lot of helpful information here. So I am a psychologist involved in research related to this topic. Also am involved in a lot of training and clinical training. I'd say I love when things can be interactive. Feel free, I've got the chat up here right next to my slides. So if anybody has any commentary, questions, thoughts that you want to pop in the chat as we're going through, I'd love for this to be as useful for all of you as possible. So guidelines. Guidelines they're helpful. They help to just provide standard advice to clinicians. They can set up how we train future clinicians. They help to set priorities for research. And there are some, so I said, I'm a psychologist, so I think from my psychology lens, the American Psychological Association does have a broader set of guidelines for assessment intervention for persons with disabilities, which is incredibly helpful and wonderful. And I do recommend that everybody check that out. What I will say when I looked them over is they are very broad disability, very helpful, lots of important information, but not necessarily speaking specifically to those individuals with intellectual disability, nor specifically to how do we do psychotherapy. So that's where our project comes in. So I refer to our RRTC. So the Nisonger Center has been funded for 2 cycles by the National Institutes of Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research to really figure out how to listen to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to help inform research and clinical practice. And so part of this was looking at both the research and talking to clinicians and people with lived experience to come up with these guidelines. So before I talk to you about the guidelines, I promise I'm not going to spend too much time talking about how we got to them, but I do think it's helpful because it's a little bit different from like these guidelines that, you know, folks in an ivory tower just said, well, clinicians, this is what you should do. And that was very much not our goal. Our goal was to take this community engaged research process and take the research and evidence, pair it with lived experience to make something that honored both aspects of that. So to do that, we had a learning collaborative where we had U.S. national experts in the field to help us talk about the study design, how we collected our data. They helped us think about the guidelines at every step. Lots of smart people that have been doing mental health research. The other group that was instrumental was our disability experience expert panel. So you're going to hear me calling them the DEEP. And the DEEP is a group of individuals with lived experience in various ranges of disability and mental health. And they very much helped us in the same things, helped us think about what we were researching, how we were doing it, how we should share the information, and what tools would make it useful to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that very much framed the products that we've got to. So that was the folks that helped us as we even just started from the very beginning. And then we took this through a process where we did a scoping lit review, a very systematic lit review where we looked at the state of the research. We know that broadly speaking, research says that psychotherapy is effective for adults with intellectual disability. We were hoping we were going to be able to pull out and narrow down which interventions were deemed effective and well supported with evidence for certain specific conditions. What we realized is there's still a lot of work to be done to be able to say, like, for sure, DBT should be used for this group and this presenting concerns, or cognitive behavior therapy should be used for this, or mindfulness for this. But what we did realize in our second lit review was that there are a lot of really fabulous practices and adaptations that show up over and over again in the literature. And so we combed all of those out, trying to look for the ones that were helpful for us. So kind of like got this idea that, okay, research, we've got research that it's great. We are starting to get some standardized trials that are showing positive results, but we don't know those real specifics. But what we started to see in our scoping lit review is that there were lots of discussions around how to consent, how to think about ethical considerations, how to involve support people, how to use different types of communication strategies, visual supports, pre-teaching skills. So there were a lot of themes that were coming up in the research. And so we're starting to narrow down, okay, these are the things that we need to be thinking about as therapists broadly. But I said we're going to do a community engaged process. So that's when we took the research on the road, so to speak, and we did focus groups. So first we started with clinicians because we wanted to understand from clinicians out in the community, are the strategies that we're seeing in the research what you are actually doing, and how does that go? And then we went to adults with ID and said, hey, what do you think about these strategies that are being used by different therapists? And through these focus groups, we came up with themes of things. So some of these aligned very closely with what we saw in the research, such as the types of accommodations involving support people, confidentiality, some of this like the therapeutic process itself, how long are the sessions, all of these. But we also heard some really important parts that didn't come up in the research, such as this rapport building aspect, using interests to build rapport, this advocacy and empowerment and self-determination theme that we heard over and over again from therapists and individuals with lived experience, as well as some of those benefits and areas of, continued growth on the part of training needs of the therapist. So then what we did is we as a group kind of pulled together all of this research. We worked very closely with our DEEP, running by what we thought we were seeing in the literature and from all of the focus groups were the different types of guidelines that should be in place, and came up with this product, which is our practice guidelines for psychotherapy with adults who have intellectual disability. So that's available at this website. And what I'm going to do now is talk you through really what we did with these guidelines. I want to acknowledge, so you can see like large amounts of acknowledgements here, and that is very much because we had such a fabulous team. We were funded by NIDLR, then we worked with our group of lived experience experts to really flesh it out, then had other folks that have gotten in there with us. And so what we have now is our guidelines. So here's what I'd like to kind of walk through with you all today. There's a lot here. So that's why I said we might want to, I'd love to have some discussion about which of these you'd like to spend more time on. We could spend an entire ECHO series going through all of these. So those of you as therapists, or those of you who, anyone on this, of these different guidelines, which are the ones that you think are things that you find very challenging, or that you feel really like, oh, I want to hear more about? Can you just put in the chat? So we're thinking about things like cultural considerations, intersectionality, ethical principles, empowering clients to self-advocate, involving support people, communication, building relationships, accommodations, assessment, structuring therapy. Yeah. And then trauma. Yes, I'm seeing Matthew, accommodations and support within therapy. Cool. Yeah. So we'll, what we might do for the sake of time, oh, and I see another like there, is we'll kind of I'll gloss over some of the important considerations, not that they're not important, but maybe then we can dig a little bit more into those foundational concepts of therapy and that therapeutic process. I feel like those are that's the nitty gritty of this. Okay, one of the other things that we've done is included quotes. So one of the things that we do within the therapy guidelines themselves is add illustrative quotes from either our disability experience expert panel, clinicians from our focus groups, or individuals with ID. So you'll see some call outs of just things illustrating what we're talking about and why we kind of came to the conclusions that we did. So some of these important considerations didn't come up. So interestingly, something that didn't come up in the focus group is this idea about intersectionality. It just wasn't something. We had a relatively diverse focus group, but I think everyone was very much trained in on that therapeutic process. But there is a whole section in the guidelines that really just talks about the importance of honoring intersectionality and different cultural considerations that can come in. You're going to see that woven in a little bit in the guidelines. Would say the guidelines could, yet again, be a series of books. We try to make it a usable document for folks. So it is not. It's very much a condensed but dense version of everything to think about with a lot of links. The other thing is ethical principles. This might be like, well, of course, this is obvious, but it's really important, I think, to stress first guardianship and understanding guardianship and what it might look like in your state, the different types of guardianship. The other one is obtaining appropriate signed forms or the verbal equivalent. This was really striking what came out in our focus groups. We would ask them if they understood confidentiality and HIPAA and all of these things, and everyone said, oh, yes, definitely. We know that. We know we have to sign releases. But then when we started to dig down, and the content we often got to was that they didn't like that their information was being shared with everyone in the team. And so being really cognizant about getting permission, but also making sure that we're doing it in a way that leads to self-determination of the individual about what is shared and when, and letting them know they can change their mind. That was another thing. Folks, it was really cool that everybody knew that if they were their own guardian, they got to sign the releases of information and all of those things, but they didn't seem to understand that they could also take it back. There's a lot of other discussions as far as how to guard against discrimination, both ageism or ableism, as well as other things, and then being aware of diagnostic overshadowing. So I think you heard some really powerful quotes. My therapist forced me to do things I wasn't able to do, and then said I was pretending or not able. I was like pretending that I couldn't do something. We also had another individual talk about how they got kicked out of a group because they were engaging in stereotypies with their hands. So just some very concrete things to think about as we go through this. Yeah, so just some other pieces when we think about prioritizing the client is another one just to think about is often an individual is not the person who sought the referral. It might be they are forced to be there. Their parent might be coming in with their own agenda. And so really just making sure that we as therapists are really finding out what they need and what they need support, maybe the support person as well, but really being mindful about who the client is and getting to know each client for who they are individually versus maybe their diagnosis. Okay, so I know we talked about how the therapeutic process is the one we're going to spend the most time on. This is one that I think when we started talking about it, I was like, well, duh, of course. But it wasn't something that I had read anywhere. And it was really clients and individuals talking about how the therapeutic process in addition to addressing anxiety, depression, whatever, is a fabulous place to teach clients how to advocate for themselves, how to have agency in the therapeutic process. So even before you get in there, what are your treatment goals? These are the things we can do. What would you like? How can we do this? And so being able to really help set these goals, and from their perspective. So often folks don't get that experience, but it's, as a therapist, we can dig down into what they want to build skills on and do that. We can really help to empower them. And there's a lot of great things like supported decision making, and we have that link in the slides, and also in our guidelines, lots of links on how to do that. And really just thinking about it. The other piece to think about is really teaching the individual how to advocate for themselves. One of the coolest examples that I saw was teaching the client that at the end they brought the support people or the parent in at the end of the session, and the client taught everybody else the strategy that they were going to work on. So it's a great way to give them power and have them be in that role of teaching. So I think there's a lot of really important piece of groundwork that, and I think the research is starting to emerge on this. We have lots of colleagues that are working on like being self-determined and all this. That in and of itself can help your mental health. So being able to validate the person that their thoughts and feelings are important, and how they can do that is just such an important part, I think, and how we build therapy can just be such a fabulous way to put it into action. I don't know, how have others, have people thought about this before? Are there ways that you put empowerment or self-determination into your therapeutic process? Let you think about it. Oh, yeah. That's a huge one, Matthew. Do we have the parent or guardian in the room with them during treatment or not? And giving them that choice. Someone may have never asked them that choice before. And so giving them that choice is huge, which also leads really nicely into that idea of involving support people. And it's one of, yet again, it's like foundational, right? You're building what the therapy session is going to look like. So getting permission to include the person. And like I said before, regularly checking in with them. How are things going today? Do you want to start with your parent, your staff, whomever, at the beginning? Do we want to do it at the end so we can debrief with them? And some of those pieces. And then also being sensitive. We heard painfully during the focus groups at least 2 examples where the support person who was either neglectful or abusive towards the individual was really trying to align themselves with the therapist. So just being mindful of that and empowering the clinician or empowering the individual to have support can be just so important. And then kind of same thing, going back to that idea of structuring therapy is orienting everybody. What is therapy? What should you expect from therapy? This is one thing we heard from clinicians over and over again, is that, well, the people come in and they have unrealistic expectations. They want everything to change in 2 weeks, and they don't understand how it is. I think other things just to be thinking about are how to support staff turnover, all of the different ways. There's so many different ways that we can include support people in ways that are very beneficial for everyone. And just doing that. I think this was one of our great clinicians who said, like, what are the caregiver goals in treatment? What are your goals? Those should be 2 separate sets. Yeah, and this is a great example. This was a support person who took pictures of everything they worked on so that they could pull it up at home and remember it together. So that's a fabulous way that support people can help with that generalization of things as we go forward. So we think about it. There's a lot of great things when we think about communication. I'm going to kind of gloss over this, but it's really thinking about how we communicate and different types of assessments to make sure that we are putting our communication at a level that they are understanding, that is not ableistic or infantizing, but is also something that they can understand. So breaking things down, using augmentative and alternative communication as we go through. As I said, they spend a lot of time on how to build and maintain clinical relationships, really being able, like realizing that folks may have a history of having to defer to others, lack of trust, not feeling safe. Really, how can we model for them how we want them to be treated, and treat them like a therapy partner, not talking down to them. So lots of great strategies in here on how to build trust. Lots of our clinicians talked about taking a little bit more time at the beginning to build that relationship, talking about music, shared interests, maybe self-disclosing, not necessarily incredibly personal information, but an interest in music, animals, Vera Bradley bags, whatever it is that humanizes the therapist, and there's ways for us to connect. Okay, accommodations and supports within therapy. What we heard over and over again is the importance for this to be individualized, which is hard when we're doing research, right? And so that's why I think it's using this evidence-informed, but then personalizing it for each individual. So thinking about how do we individualize it? Visual, sometimes we heard from folks over and over again, I got handouts, but I don't read at the level. They were too hard for me to understand. The font was too small and I couldn't read the font. So thinking about even on those basic levels, what are these individuals' clear accommodation needs that they need? And then there are a lot of fabulous resources out there that have accommodations and supports within them. So there's this book that I love by Andrew Jahoda that just talks more generally about that adaptation process. And he lists a number of different types of therapeutic things to think about. He also has 2 manualized treatments related to behavioral activation for depression that are helpful. So, but here are a lot of manuals that you all can use that can work on things like the things I'm going to talk about, but I wanted to put some resources in here. And that's one of the things we really tried to do within our guidelines was pull out things that had at least initial support as examples. So not that we're necessarily saying these are the end all be all, but if you're a therapist, you're trying to figure out how to do behavioral activation with a depressed individual, this is going to be really helpful for you. So I think one of the things is visuals. As we said, really important that handouts are done with clear language, large font, at least 14-point font on your handouts. Make sure they're screen reader compatible. So things like that can be really helpful. PowerPoint that can be used to show things visually, whiteboards that you can draw out, different types of feeling charts or things, using something like just not, instead of just breathing in and out, using a hand to do like a hand breathing. We breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out. This was one that showed up. This is part of Roberts and Kwan's study. But lots of our folks in our focus groups were talking about the traffic lights. And this whole idea of red, yellow, green was something that very much resonated with all of them. So something to think about and use. Thinking about that multisensory, some folks may not be visual, they might be auditory. So recording things that could be sent home, putting a memo on an iPhone, making sure to read forms aloud to clients. If you're doing a video visit, caption it. That was something that we heard from folks that was very important as well. And And then this whole idea of multisensory. So combining things like visuals with movement, visuals and auditory, using games to help make things fun and engaging. So one of the great examples was a study that was done by McConnell et al., where they did stepping stones, where they would literally put sticky notes for different things and put them on the path. So showing the like steps to achieving a goal, and have the person walk to one and then say, okay, then next I have to do this, then next I have to do this. So really putting some movement with it. Another thing are different games that are out there. So Cooney et al. Has a game that talks about the different types of bugs that are basically your maladaptive thoughts. And so doing something of this sort, I really was excited about this one. I was hoping it'd be commercially available. It's not yet. I don't know if it ever will be, but I do think hearing that this was something that was meaningful, you get this visual, right? It's kind of fun and they're clicking on things. This one is, these are just a few other different ones. This game we've seen used. We're developing a treatment manual right now and have a game as well. And I wasn't sure. This is one that I was a little worried folks might think was too childish. But when we ran it by our disability experience panel, they really liked it. And in fact, before I even ran it by it, one of our disability experience folks was sharing. She's like, "Oh, yeah, my therapist," we were writing our focus group questions and they were helping us. And she's like, "Yeah, my therapist uses visuals. We play games. I love them." So I think that was something that was helpful to me. There's also some great different types of feelings charts or diaries. So that's often sometimes what therapists will want to do. And there's lots of ways to use visuals with different, having things be filled up. We've done different types of emoji faces to show happy all the way to worried, drawing a body, and they circle where on the body things are bothering them. So lots of ways to use visuals to help therapists, one, get the person maybe with support person assistance, maybe on their own, to be able to start to pay attention to their thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Another great one is we did see emerging work on mindfulness and the meditation of the soles on the feet. There's a visual here to help someone remember what they're doing. We even had one of the studies put a dot that they would put on the person's foot to help them look at their foot, to attend to it during the meditation, that had them really practice being mindful about their feet being grounded on the floor. So there's lots of creative ways that this is showing up. Like I said, and these are all stuff that have shown up in the research, but when we talked to folks, those were the things they said they wanted to see. So it's exciting when we see research actually being put into practice and we can use it, right? You can go ahead and search for this Douglas article and kind of look at this and make your own, but make it on this evidence-informed practice. Soles of the feet is another great one. There's a lot of literature out there that it helps with anxiety and aggression. There's some scripts. You can even Google, there's videos, all kinds of things out there once you know what you're looking for. Other things, so we kind of talked about this within communication, but as we think about how to accommodate and support, adjusting our language level, there's lots of, so some folks say that analogies are helpful. I think what we overwhelmingly heard with our focus groups was that analogies are too abstract and challenging, and it's much easier. So it's, instead of saying like, thinking about thoughts like apples that grow in a tree, and as you water them, they start to grow, it's too complex. So really thinking about, if you're going to use an analogy or something that has more abstract ideas in it, it's got to be very clear cut. And then just simplifying concepts. So that might be modeling it using social stories, role play through, so that you can help to simplify things for them a little bit more than maybe you would need to do with someone without an intellectual disability. And then generalization, we heard some really cool ways, and this is one of my favorites, is the giving them just a little bracelet that was to remind them that they're supposed to work on something. Audio recording on their phone that they can take with them, using an object that they take from the office home, something that helps them to be able to take the skill beyond just being in the office. Any other strategies or accommodations that you all have found helpful? Feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so the therapeutic process. So when we're thinking about that therapeutic process, how do we go about this? What do we need to be thinking about? The first step is really assessment, and thinking about assessment as this ongoing process. So at intake, this is an important piece, right? We need to assess to understand the current status of the individual, maybe to get the diagnosis if we don't already have them. But it also needs to be an ongoing process that can help us with progress monitoring as well as goal attainment and how do we get there. So what do we want to assess? We want to assess the psychiatric symptoms and the presence and the severity. We also want to understand the client's strengths and their areas where they need to have continued growth and support. So this can include things like their level of language, their cognitive and adaptive functioning currently, their social skills, their problem-solving skills, their strengths and their interests, and then the environment. So important, right? So of course, safety assessments, but also understanding what are the types and the intensities of the support that the individual has. How do they interact with everyone around them? What are the areas of stress or tension in their lives? Where are the areas of strong support? Understanding that going into the session can help you also know how to involve those support people, thinking about the accommodations that maybe are working in other environments that the individual is in. And those things can really help to make a difference. And I think that's where that progress monitoring and things go through. My therapist always asked me why I was there and asked me what she could do to help. That continuous assessment on and on as we go through can be just incredibly helpful. So I want to spend a little bit of time on the different types of assessments that are out there. There are increasing amounts of assessments that have been validated for adults with intellectual disability. And we have links of those in our guidelines as well. And so you can see we have the Glasgow Depression and Anxiety scales that have been developed, as well as one that's the clinical outcome of routine evaluation. Also have things like the mini pass, the brief symptom inventory, and the psychological therapies outcome tool. There's an anger scale, some fabulous quality of life scales, right? It's beyond just understanding the symptoms, but how is the individual's quality of life and what is impacting that? And I think this is the other piece. So one of the reasons that we've highlighted the Glasgow scales is that the depression has both a self-report as well as a caregiver support. Anxiety just has a self-report. So really, can we work with the individual to get some self-report idea of what is their current level of symptomatology and how is it impacting them in their daily lives? So I think when we think about it, unfortunately, while there are a ton, and there are more, there's also, we have a list of a ton of great ones that have some existing research. I don't have them on here because we only have so much time on the slides, but if you look in the guidelines, there are some related to trauma and increasing evidence for how to assess for that and some self-report measures related to trauma for adults with ID. So those are definitely things that I encourage everybody to look through in the guidelines and check out some of those other scales. But as I said, sometimes we want to assess for something, and there is not an adapted scale for individuals with developmental disabilities. So then we want to kind of look at how within the measures, what are the different types of adaptations that have been done with assessment. And these are things like simplifying words, fewer choices, using pictures, reading aloud, anchor events. So I want to ask you about your symptoms in the last 2 weeks. What was happening about 2 weeks ago? What was going on then? And helping someone really have a concrete idea of that. And then thinking within those non-specific measures, that's something you could do even with a tool that's not been developed and doesn't have that maybe specifically built in, but you could do that. What we've done for some is like, if it's on a scale of 1 to 5, how sad are you right now? A little bit more, a lot, or a whole bunch, and try to kind of use some concrete things instead of just circling numbers. Some other pictures that can help with different things. And then if we need to, we then go to caregivers or other support and assistance as we go through. The other thing that we think about is within the assessment of the goals, right? And how the first part there is really structuring therapy goals. And how do we establish this? We want to be, as we said, thoughtful about how we structure therapy. But we want to understand their motivations. Why are they participating in therapy? And what are their goals? If we're not, understanding our clients' interests and their goals within therapy are going to really help us to set up for success the best that we can. So we want to understand their reason and explain the purpose of therapy. I think that's the other piece, is they may not know why they are here. I'm here because I got in a fight with my roommate and they told me I had to go here. And they may see it as a punishment versus something that can help them. So I think really just taking the time to explain the purpose of therapy, talking about expectations, boundaries. How does therapy differ from a social relationship? What might we do in therapy? Maybe asking them what they think of therapy. This is one of our clinicians. It's a long quote, but I really like it. I often say, you're not here because you're in trouble. But telling them, what it is, what it isn't. I'm not going to come to your house for supper, but I'm here to help you. And you don't have to help me. You don't have to make me feel better. That's not your job, right? So really just setting up those boundaries as you structure therapy, and as you set those goals. Thinking about the structure of the session. So what types of length do you want to have? And this is one of the other things that the research was very mixed on. Some folks said your typical session worked. Some research said it was good to have it longer. Some said it was good to have it shorter. So thinking about that with the individual, how can we make it evidence informed, but flexible and tailored to the individual? What we also heard is that you may need to use more directive approaches with individuals. So instead of saying, how's the last week been? You might want to have more specific questions. You said that you got really sad when it was time to go home from your job. How has that time been for you? Right? So really trying to come up with that aspect. Then after you kind of think about those things, then kind of going down into the content. We know there's most research for cognitive behavior therapy, but there's emerging research in a lot of other places. And then also thinking about things like using interests, such as animals, to help reinforce things. How are we also maybe not only addressing the depression, anxiety, or trauma, but addressing social skills, relationship building, digging into disability content. So how do they feel about their disability? How are they experiencing things like ableism? These all might be things that they want to talk about or that'll be meaningful or important for them. The other thing that we heard within this idea of structuring therapy is that often more time needs to be spent early on teaching what we call prerequisite skills. So we may need to spend more time identifying what are feelings? What are feelings and thoughts? How are they impacted? How do they impact behavior? Really starting to get at that piece of really understanding, teaching the calming skills and breaking those down in a lot more detail before we maybe dive into more specific coping plans. Understanding that behaviors are linked to feelings, right? How do we monitor behavior? Really spending time talking about how to do that diary, all of this, really that idea of just identifying, processing emotions often needs to have a little bit more of a build-up time as we go through. The other piece is just the importance of understanding the increased rates of trauma in individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so there's lots of different assessment tools, as I alluded to, that are available and cited here. But it's also really important to understand variability of what's experienced as traumatic. So adults with IDD will identify things such as breaking up with a significant other, witnessing an accident, as in addition to things like assault, neglect, or abuse that could be experienced as just as traumatic to them. Losing part of one's support system. This was something we heard a lot about, the traumatic experience of direct support professionals or support people that are there one day and then quit and are gone. And there's no opportunity for them to have said goodbye. So it's really grief, like losing someone that really has been, taking on a caregiver role for them, maybe like taking the place of a parent in their eyes. And so being able to understand that, or not having access to a support person when there is a stressful time or a natural disaster, all of these things can be very traumatic. And so it's just really important for us to understand. Yeah, and just that vulnerability, that interpersonal trauma and loss and change. And that therapy can be a really important part of processing that for them. So even if they maybe aren't presenting to clinic for a specific PTSD, taking a trauma-informed approach can be incredibly helpful. Thinking about how to address the environment. So we think about things like that, thinking about how can we set up the environment around them at home to be more trauma-informed. So maybe the people in their lives don't understand that some of their reactions to the stimuli around them are trauma responses. So how can we educate both the individual as well as those around them of things that may be triggers for them? Can we think about ways to add supports in the environment that are going to help them? And then just realizing often that there are barriers to treatment when it comes to trauma. Often trauma is not identified, and some of the assumptions too that maybe individuals can't benefit from therapy or trauma-focused therapy have led to that delay, either now or in the individual's history. So it might be that the trauma was a long time ago, but nobody actually has addressed it ever. So just things to be mindful. And we heard some just really powerful stories. My therapist helped me heal up those wounds that have been hurting. And I think that was the other piece, is that often trauma can be just kind of brushed aside, not acknowledged. And they just get maybe identified as a behavior problem, but folks haven't really dug into understanding why. Why is the individual engaging in the behavior? How can we work on the root cause versus just being reactive to the behavior? We also added in sessions. Now, this wasn't something that really came up in the research or in our in our focus groups, but felt that it was an important aspect to think about and make sure that clinicians were aware of the high rates of medical conditions that folks with IDD have. And so really taking a biopsychosocial model of care is really key. It's key with any person, but especially when we think of folks with intellectual developmental disabilities that do have high rates of that. So really thinking about things such as predisposing factors that led to the problems around them, things that are keeping them going, protective factors. And this could be psychosocial as well as physical, things like ear infections, migraines, headaches, menstruation cycles, all of these things, seizures can be incredibly impactful. And so having that biopsychosocial model of care and cooperating with and coordinating care with not only the individuals prescribing psychiatric medicines, which is very important, but also coordinating care with everyone so that everybody is on the same page, so that we know when the psychiatrist is changing a med, so that the staff can talk about how there's been a significant change in the person's weight, but it's because they aren't eating because the food at the group home changed. That's very different than it maybe being because of depression or because of a side effect of a medication. Hey, they're having a toothache, so they're very irritable right now and self-injuring. It might be the toothache and not self-injury as maybe interpreted as something that would be a depressive symptom. So really thinking about that as a team is so important. So those that kind of walked you through really fast what our guidelines are. I wanted to talk a little bit in the last few minutes that I have about some of the tools that we've developed to go with the guidelines. So that link that I had at the very beginning was our extended therapy guidelines for therapists. What we've also done is worked with our DEEP to pull together a clear language version of the therapy guidelines so that adults with ID can read and understand the things that they can, ask their therapist to do. So that's the one that's on the left side. And then the other one is a therapy toolkit, where what we did was we then had a discussion about having some type of a navigation tool or something. And what we landed on was a tool that really individuals can fill out to, oh, I realized I took that slide out. Sorry, I got too excited pasting in these pictures and this to show a picture of the therapy toolkit. But basically what it is we would have, first, this is my name. These are my pronouns. These are my support people. These are my likes. These are my interests. These are the things that have worked in the past. These are the things that are not. So it could be basically a tool that someone can fill out either before they go in with a client or when they're with the, or before they go with the therapist, or when they're in there with the therapist, work on that at the very beginning so that they're both on the same tool, the same page, so that they're communicating the same way. And then hopefully if the person ever has to go to another therapist, they have this toolkit that they can say, these are my likes, these are my dislikes, this is my history, these are my diagnoses. Maybe they don't want to have to get into and verbalize some of the things that are triggers for them every time. It's hard to talk about them. Can we just put them down on a piece of paper and hand it to someone and then answer questions instead of having to rehash all of it? So one of the most recent things that we did that you see on this is that one of our LEND trainees and our self-advocate LEND faculty member, as well as someone who was on our DEEP, did videos, how-to videos that are really geared towards the adult with ID that walks them step by step how to fill out the mental health toolkit. So I encourage you, the Clear Language Guide and the Mental Health Therapy Toolkit are available at this website here. And then the guidelines, if you even go to this the blue document, the more detailed therapist guidelines are available at that link. I threw in a lot of other kind of my most favorite resources as we go through. I talked about the behavior activation interventions and those manuals. The awesome thing there is that you can go to this website set up an account, which is free, and download all the materials to use. So I think that's a great thing if you're thinking about using behavioral activation. I already talked about Andrew's book, which I just found really helpful. And then clear language and plain language. I think sometimes we think we're putting, that's one of the things I learned from our deep. Sometimes I thought I was putting things in clear language or plain language, and I wasn't. So there's some great resources out there on how to put things into plain language, and some different resources. Then lots of references. And I said an acknowledgement to our fabulous learning collaborative and our grant that we have done. And then I'll open it up. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions, but I'm happy to take them.
You've got plenty of time for questions, so feel free to put those in the chat or unmute everybody.
Has anybody put any of these into action and seen them work well? These types of things? Have you seen stuff like this before?
You guys are quiet today. Nobody has ever used any of these skills?
I'm not a counselor, but I do really appreciate the conversation because I work with a lot of people who engage, who have various needs. And I'm just really grateful that, this information is getting out there to people and just bringing it to the people's forefronts of their minds. Because I feel like it's one of those things that we think about and then we try to do better. And then sometimes we forget about it a couple months later. And so I've been just, as you've been presenting, I've just been trying to consider like, okay, how can I better shift, even though I'm not a therapist or a clinician like that, how can I shift the way I speak to my clients and people that I work with so that I can be more inclusive to the various needs that they have, because you can't really assume.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear, Olivia, and thanks. Yeah, and help share it widely. But yeah, I agree. I think a lot of this is therapy, but it's also just how we interact with folks in professional and different interactions with folks beyond just therapy.
I really focus on developing rapport slowly and based on what they're interested in. So taking it slow and really making sure that relationship, the rapport is developing and not rushing, But I really appreciated that point to check in consistently. Like what can I help you with? What are your goals? And asking that regularly.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I agree. And I think that was things like when folks talked about rapport building, it made complete sense. But yeah, just that, like, maybe don't go through your checklist and start on your manualized treatment right away. But taking that time to kind of build slowly and build that trust. Oh, and I see Matthew says, I'm always using role play, handouts, graphics, YouTube clips to engage students. Make it as simple, or clients, make it as simple as possible to engage clients. Yeah. And Sarah's sharing it. I think I'm happy to hear you're just getting ready to start your graduate program, Sarah, so you can share that. I think one of the things we also heard is that often graduate programs, unless you're at a LEND or a USAD like Utah, they don't necessarily get training in how to do therapy for individuals with developmental disabilities. So not only taking this with you, but sharing it with your colleagues and others. That's really our goal, is to try to get the word out so that folks can have tools to be able to have therapy, because we know access and therapists feeling comfortable doing therapy is something that is lacking. Hence this whole ECHO exists, right? To kind of build that capacity. But I think the more we can share it at all levels, from those who are interacting with clinicians, those who are getting ready to be clinicians, those that have been clinicians for a long time. That's how we can kind of really start to build the capacity for all of us to know how to support folks.
All right, thank you so much, Andrea. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm going to pull up our case scenario for today. This is, we'll have some questions about the guidelines. So Andrea, feel free to chime in if you feel, if you want to add anything as we're discussing. I'm going to drop this in the chat as well as share my screen so you can see this. Okay, let me zoom in so you can see these words. All right, so our case scenario today is fairly simple so that we can discuss the guidelines that we talked about today and important considerations. We are talking about Cassidy. The name has been changed for confidentiality, who is a 25-year-old female currently living in a group home receiving supported living services. Her diagnoses include moderate intellectual disability and autism. She was referred to therapy by her supported living provider because they have observed some baseline behavior changes that they think might indicate that she's experiencing depression. They say that these changes include sleeping more than usual, decreased interest in food, which is usually a motivator, and decreased interaction with support staff, who she usually enjoys spending time with. So a few questions with this in mind. For our therapists who are here or those who are becoming therapists, how would you approach an intake assessment with Cassidy and what accommodations might be helpful? Don't everybody talk at once.
If possible, I want to have a lot of the collaterals, a lot of the information gathered before I met with Cassidy. If the group home could facilitate any of that, if I could gather any sort of previous medical records, things like that, or previous treatment records, that would save Cassidy from having to, sit through a really long assessment with me. And when I did meet with Cassidy, ideally would be focusing on, what would she want to accomplish and trying to help her understand things. I find with people with intellectual disabilities, a really long drawn out assessment can be pretty burdensome and difficult for them because they're sometimes with some folks, their attentions are very limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. Thanks, Matthew.
Thinking along the lines of what he was talking about, thinking of that biopsychosocial aspect, I'd want to kind of understand, have there been any physical changes, anything of that sort? So getting that kind of medical collateral to understand that as well would be really important to me, and to make sure we understand if there's been any changes. We talked about that trauma, any changes in the home environment or work environment, et cetera. That precipitated the change in behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tend to think, as far as accommodations go, where she is living in a group home, she may have a strong relationship with some of the support staff if they've been working there for a long time. That may be an accommodation that would help her feel more comfortable in the therapy setting, especially when you're meeting someone new, you don't know your therapist and you're working on establishing a relationship. So I think possibly offering the option to have a support staff there with her as she's completing the intake process. That was something that stood out to me in those guidelines, thinking about how comforting, how important that single accommodation could be for sure.
Now, you may have already mentioned this, but with the assessment, like say it takes longer than maybe doing it 2 hours.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry I'm late, but I was late, Um, do you use the paraprofessionals at all in the assessment? Like, do they write down, kind of journal the behavior? So that way, when it comes back to the full assessment, you've got that information too.
Yeah, I think some of the information that was gathered in this case study or case scenario is what the direct support professionals or paraprofessionals observed. And then Matthew made a great point where he'd like to continue to collect some more information so that the assessment process isn't as burdensome to the individual who's coming in. So I think for sure we'd have some information, hopefully, from the paraprofessionals throughout the process, especially if they have if Cassidy said that she wanted her support staff with her in the room, and if she wanted them to share or felt like it would be helpful for them to help her explain, there's definitely lots of potential points for interaction there.
Yeah, and maybe even thinking after that initial intake, like I said, if you want to kind of track moods or work on that piece, that's something that maybe support people could also work together with Cassidy on. So she may need some assistance with like thinking what, like reminding to write things down or to say whether she's feeling happy or sad, and they can write what's going on and she can label her emotions, but kind of having that collaborative process is a nice way to kind of incorporate both Cassidy's experience as well as getting that support person aspect.
What if she is nonverbal? And you may have covered this, and I apologize. But
No,
what
no,
if she's nonverbal?
that's
In
a
that
big point.
case, what do you do?
Yeah, and I think that's admittedly something that's a limitation in our research, is that almost all of the therapy that things were based on, all of the therapy was based on folks that did have spoken language and our focus groups as well. So I think that's an area that we still need to kind of work on from the guidelines perspective. I think that's the other piece. Is one I might ask, is she completely, as we think of nonverbal, or is it that she's not using spoken words, but are there other ways to get her opinion on things? So whether it be using pictures to have her point, does she use an augmentative or alternative communication system or a switch system? But just finding ways, even if she doesn't, to be able to kind of understand what are her strengths, what are her things that she likes to do, and doing some of that, even just kind of basic preference assessment and choices can be things that still can be done with folks that don't have spoken language.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. The second question we had was, what elements of the Nisonger Center's psychotherapy guidelines are particularly important here? I think we kind of touched on that with the first question, talking about accommodations. A lot of that, but I would love to hear your thoughts, Andrea, for Cassidy's specific situation. We don't have tons of information, but we have a little bit of context. Which of those guidelines do you feel like are particularly relevant here?
Yeah, I mean, all of them. As we talked about, it sounds like things were identified as concerns of the support people. So thinking about how do we involve the support people would be an important one. Let's see what else we want. And obviously communication, which we already kind of, I think, might be for someone with a moderate intellectual disability, what is not only understanding what their mode of communication is, but what is their receptive language ability, so that we can make sure that we're tailoring that. And that goes back to that, right? Tailoring the intervention to the individual. So it might be that we need to go to more assessments or more treatments that are more concrete, such as like a soles of the feet, with very concrete, or behavioral activation that are more concrete versus something that has more of the cognitive therapy aspects to it. So really kind of spending time on that assessment. I know it could be burdensome. And then the other piece, once we understand that, is really maybe doing some of that like pre-assessment. Yeah, the education expectations. What are the support staff hoping to get out of it? What would we need Cassidy to be able to do? What would we need support people be able to do? Yeah, those are the ones that kind of come to mind for me.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ashley, for dropping that in the chat, the psychoeducation and setting expectations. We don't know based on the information in the case scenario if it's been communicated well to Cassidy, why she's been referred to therapy. So that's a really important part. I also tend to think we don't have a ton of information here if Cassidy has a medical history. Maybe there's some medical history that's important that might be influencing this, so that Matthew did mention, looking at the medical portion, see if there's potentially some influence there. So connecting with other providers, potentially making sure that we're taking that biopsychosocial approach for sure. And our final question for this case scenario is, what will be important to consider about Cassie's diagnoses as the therapeutic process progresses? So past intake, once you've gathered information and you're working on that therapeutic relationship and making progress in therapy, what will be important to keep in mind?
I would say her ability to self-help. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
To move away from the therapeutic and be able to self-help. So know when she gets mad, this is what you do. Know when you get sad, this is what you can do. That way, it's not necessarily the professional or the paraprofessional to do that for her. She can do it for herself.
Yeah, therapy typically involves a lot of skill building and homework of sorts. So we may need to think about how we can provide supports to encourage Cassidy to engage in the homework portion of therapy. And Andrea had mentioned also that facilitation by paraprofessionals to make sure that that's being done so it's successful and we aren't missing that really important element of the therapeutic process.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, James, right? That generalization of skills beyond first the therapy room to home, and then to build that independence so that the individual, and how can we work on adjusting those treatment goals as things change, and understanding priorities, that ongoing assessment that we need to do is, as Cassidy is maybe feeling a bit better, are there other goals that need to be addressed as we're going through it? Do we need to be thinking about what is the post-treatment plan? How can we get a coping plan in place that the team can implement when they're done with all of the therapy sessions?
Penny dropped in the chat, the counselor may need to adjust the structure of a typical session, where it occurs, length of session. Yeah, absolutely. Another element of accommodations is making sure that the setting facilitates success. So maybe that's a shorter session, shorter sessions more often, or longer sessions farther apart. That's a great point. Thank you, Penny.
And then also reassessing that involvement of the support people, right? So we talked about how maybe with this individual, they'll start therapy with the support person in there the whole time, but maybe that needs to be reassessed, and who's being included in therapy, and what does Cassidy think of that? As she gets more comfortable with the therapist, does she want more one-on-one time? Are there certain people she'd like to be included in therapy and some that she would not? So that ongoing process of both that informed consent of release of information as well as just choice.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone who added to our conversation. Those are all of our questions for our case scenario. As usual, this case scenario plus notes on our discussion will be added to the Canvas page, so feel free to send an email to the MHIDD@aggies.usu.edu email if you'd like access to the Canvas page. The survey for today's session is in the chat, so fill that out if you would like to have a certificate of attendance or CEUs from the Utah Social Work Association. We also just love having the feedback so we can know how to improve our sessions in the future. Looks like we'll end a few minutes early today, but feel free to hang around, ask questions if you have any other questions for Andrea or for me about any of our future sessions.
Thanks, everybody. Yes, Ashley, let me get that link real quick for you, and I can post the professional guidelines one.
I was able to find the professional guidelines. I was not able to find the toolkit that was created for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities.
Gotcha, sorry. I didn't read it close enough, did I?
No, you're okay.
Give me a second and I'll get there. They just moved stuff around too on our website, so hopefully it's still there. Like this ongoing. It looks different today. Okay, hold on. Keep trying to like play around with how to get it so that folks can find stuff. And I will say, I can also put the how. Okay, so let me double check to make sure this is where it's at. Yes, okay. So this one has this link here for the RRTC has the clear language therapy and then the mental health therapy toolkit. And then the videos are like late and breaking, hot off the presses. So they're not linked with that yet. But I can definitely get that for you as well. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Rachel. As I please send it to you instead of to everybody.
No worries.
Okay. Let me get the YouTube one. And I'd love feedback on those too. Maybe, oh, she's already gone, isn't she? But we just posted those not that long ago. So I'd love to hear how folks are actually using them because we kind of created them based on everybody's input, but I have some colleagues that are getting ready to put them into use, but we haven't yet. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yet.
Oh, I'm not gonna go to the QR. Well, and do you guys typically send out the slides afterwards?
We don't usually do like an email blast. We keep them.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Page.
So let me pull. For some reason the link isn't coming up for me for the therapy. Here we go. Yeah, I'll have to send it to you. I can't, if anyone wants the video, I'm struggling to find it currently.
Oh, yeah, feel free to send anything following up to me and I'll share it with everyone.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. There was a pretty quiet group today. They're usually a little more talkative. So we're getting to the end of school year. College semesters just ended. I'm guessing people are a little burnt out, but
Yeah, no,
I
I
know
understand.
everyone was really looking forward to it. So super, super appreciative.
Sure. Yep. Happy to do it. All right. Well, take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrea.